Nice to see folks joining. Morning, everybody. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to get in. Nice to see Rhonda Ross, my old friend. First of all, I really appreciate everybody taking the time this morning to attend, to join. It's an honor to have a chance to share some thoughts and ideas with the community here. And this is a deep topic, and we'll be trying to move through a number of these deep topics that have um, in the DevOps space over these coming few months to just sort of help to broaden all of our thinking about what really is our job, what really are the challenges we're trying to tackle here. So as you come in, obviously, feel free to put questions. I think there's a Q&A capability in Zoom. So we'll have some time, some dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the session. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Seems like most of the attendees are here now. So first of all, a few housekeeping notes here that your mics are muted. The session will be recorded. You'll have access to it afterwards. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. My name is Andrew Davis. I'm the Chief Product Officer of AutoRABIT. I've been in the DevOps for Salesforce space since before it was cool, for probably about 10 years. Yeah, delighted to have a chance to share this topic today on moving from project to product. There's a lot in here. It's a bit subtle, but so I wanted to start by just introducing this idea of a project to product movement. And it's kind of this is actually something that has come up multiple times over the last number of decades. What is the right way to approach software development projects or initiatives as a project, or treating them as a product and so forth? But I'll get into that a little bit more. And then try to disambiguate what is a project and what's project management? What is a product and what is product management? And the terms are used so casually these days, we often don't clearly distinguish between them. But then we'll talk about why move from project to product? What is so different about that you would consider changing your operating model a bit? And then how can you get started? So as the structure. So what is the project product movement? Now, if you do go search Google, I'd encourage you to not do it now, because otherwise you'll spend the whole rest of the webinar just poking around Google as opposed to paying attention. But you'll see lots and lots and lots of references to project to product, project to product transformations and companies that build their business around, this movement. So when I say it's a movement, that's kind of what I mean, that there's a lot of attention being driven to this over the last number of years in particular. And I would say that was largely catalyzed by a book of the same name by Mick Kirsten, who's CTO, I believe he's CTO now of PlanView, formerly of TaskTop. And this book was a central topic of discussion and public discussion between Mick Kirsten and Gene Kim and to the DevOps community and so forth. And so I'd say that kind of catalyzed this initiative. But so I'm going to get into a little bit more what this means. Now, I'm not going to be able to get into the full depth of that. You can look at the book for more information. But when we talk about what is project management, first of all, when I looked at some descriptions of projects, what characterized a project, I took a couple of liberties with the terms that are most often used, but I decided to say that projects are two-pack. They're temporary, unique, progressive, asset intensive, and then subject to chance. And by that, what I mean is that a project, by definition, is temporary. It's going to end. It has a beginning, it has an end, and it doesn't just go on forever. That's part of the nature of it being a project. If it doesn't have an end, it's not a project. Also, a project is unique. It's something that you've not done before. It's not something that is done on a regular basis. in which case that also is not a project. Project is a new initiative for a period of time. It's progressive. It's something where it's not that you're doing the same thing continuously for a period of time. You're building one layer upon layer upon layer to create something very new and distinctive over the course of the project duration. It is asset intensive or resource intensive. A project demands time, money, people, primary thing, maybe other materials depending on what you're doing. And it's always subject to chance and risk. And some of the some of the focus in Agile, right, has been to try to attack this idea of waterfall project initiatives because there's a great risk that by the end of the project, you no longer need what you set out to build. But there's many, many risks along the way that need to be managed. And that leads us into the discipline of project management. And project management is the activity, I guess from one point of view, it's the activity of managing the risks associated with projects, trying to bring together the necessary resources, managing the risks, and accomplishing the end goal, It's all of the planning activities. And it really is a very, very special, precious skill to have a good project manager. If you've ever been on a project without a project manager or with a less skilled project manager, you can appreciate the power of a very good project manager. A lot of their work is communication, coordinating between the groups of people. But fundamentally, a project manager comes in to manage a project, which is why it's so important for us to understand the distinctive characteristics of a project, it being, for example, time-bound. Now, when you think about projects, often what comes to my mind are construction projects, which are arguably the most widely visible projects in our society. First of all, you can see them with your eyes. You can drive past. You see all of this heavy equipment. One day there was just an empty lot. A year later, there's a huge building there. And so the progress in a construction project is visible for all to see. There's clearly a beginning. There's clearly an end. It's unique in the sense that you've never had that building in that place before. It's progressive, layer after layer after layer being completed. So it's a good way to have a mental model, build a mental model of what a project is. Famously, projects are characterized by this iron triangle of time, cost, and scope. And so what this diagram is trying to illustrate is that you might have the wish to sort of move the scope here or move the scope there, but the essence of this diagram is the bottom right image, which is that if you try to pull the scope out, it's just not going to work with the cost and time that you have budgeted. That iron triangle really means that the scope is tightly bound to the time that you've allocated for the project and the cost you've allocated for the project. And so what it is that you want to accomplish, is bound to this iron triangle. Now, the reason this is important, right, is because for a number of reasons, right? The scope means what is it that you want to accomplish? You have some initiative in mind. And if you're thinking of it as a project, then you need to think about the period of time. And that leads to this, it requiring long-term planning, for example, and long-term budget allocation. And so the cost, we'll come back to this idea of the cost aspect and the time aspect, because when you start thinking about costs that are, $1 million or, more or less than that, but significant costs, it gets very much wound up with the way that organizations do budgeting. And when you think about time, it gets very much wound up with the way organizations do strategic planning. And typically cost and time are already bound together with an annual budget. And so this idea of an annual budget cycle is the way that we have learned in most organizations to try to not waste all of our money or waste all of our time and try to manage the scarce resources of time and money. But it lends itself strongly towards the project thinking where there's a certain fixed scope we can accomplish in a particular period of time. Now, I want to, having said that, establish some of that foundation on what are projects. I want to move on to what are products and what's product management, because it's a distinctive thing. So when we talk about a product, and here presumably we're mostly talking about software products. If you've shown up to this webinar, you're probably somewhere in the software space. Um, a product is something that is continually developed or improved and improved over time to meet evolving user needs. Now, if you're producing a physical product, a lot of the design of that is just done up front, and then later on you're just reproducing, manufacturing the same thing. When we talk about software products, though, because it's infinitely easy to distribute software over the internet at basically no cost. Most of the energy in building a software product goes into this ongoing creative process of always evolving what it is that you've built. And so most of our roles are that we've got, we're just working steadily to evolve whatever systems we're building on. Now, there's an aspect of building a product that requires a long-term commitment. Now, clearly, projects also require long-term commitment. You're building something that will be there for the long term, but products require long-term commitment from the team, from the staff. So a project, typically, you'll bring the people to the work, and they'll do that work for a period of time, and then they'll move off. I was in a consulting company, Aperio. When we were there, we, bring people to the work. We bring people in for a period of time, but it's not a long-term commitment to that project, as opposed to somebody who's a full-time employee in a company. They're kind of long-term committed to that project. But another aspect of product management is it's very focused on user experiences. Why? Because you want to be assessing whether people are actually using that product, and assessing whether that product is meeting their needs and evolving what you're doing steadily to try to meet those needs more effectively. Products also require cross-functional collaboration, which is presumably true for projects as well, but product development really does require a sustainable pace of development practices. In projects, often you can have a huge push to get something done in a particular, on time, on budget, in a particular time window. But products, it's a marathon, right? Not a sprint. And when we talk about product management, now I'm head of product for AutoRABIT. I have a number of product managers for whom that is their full-time job, working together with me at AutoRABIT. Now, it's very common in any software vendor, a company that's actually producing software for sale, that you'll have these product managers. It is less common that you'll have these product managers inside an organization, but that really is what we're talking about today, like how you might be a product manager building internal products for your organization, as opposed to thinking about what you're building as projects. And perhaps I should have clarified that context up front, but product management is the discipline of planning, forecasting, marketing a product across all stages of its life cycle. It's sort of cradle to grave, thinking about everything about the product, how it appears, how people get access to it, the pricing, all these kinds of things. And it's, as I said before, it's rooted in customer experience. You have to be thinking, first of all, about what people want, what people need, what is the job to be done, what is the job that they might hire, so to speak, your software to do. Having a product vision of the story that you're enabling for them. And so the product manager broadly is responsible for guiding the activities of the engineering team, but guiding them on an ongoing basis. And really, this characteristic of continuous evolution is key. So when we talk about this question about why move from project to product in terms of how we think about what it is that we are, what it is that we're delivering, what it is that we're building, why move from project to product? So when we think about the beginning of software initiatives, and I'm using this term initiative because otherwise I'll slip into this default language of saying software projects. But if we think about how we built software back in the 70s. Now, I was not building software in the 70s, but the first companies to really try to build large-scale internal software for their banks or whatever else in the 70s and the 80s, how did they learn how to do that? How did they approach that? Well, they approached it the way they would approach any other large organizational initiative that they knew required specialized skills and time and money. for example, building a building. And so the examples from civil engineering, from construction projects, were hugely informative in defining how we thought about software projects. So we'll just, we know how to build a building. How different could building software be? Let's use the same metaphor, same motif for building software. And so it was tied to budgeting cycles, is very tied to consulting companies. I'll come back to that in a minute to explain a little bit more. But building software was seen very much as a one-time effort. Hey, we need a new customer relationship management system. All right, great, let's build it. You don't want to spend any more time than necessary. Today, you don't have one. You want to get to a future state where you do have one, and you want to be able to just spend the money, get it done, and not think about it again. And that is a project orientation, beginning, end, unique creation. Now, when we think about products or building, for example, treating that CRM as an ongoing product, it's a very different mindset. It's not a cost mindset. Oh, we have to pay this company or whatever to get a CRM. We just have to make that expenditure. That's a cost-focused mindset. Instead, a product mindset, products, software products, for example, their product company thinks about revenue generation, about how they can deliver more. They can deliver steadily increasing value to end users and reclaim a significant portion of that value as revenue. So that mindset of value creation is intrinsic to product development. Now, that's subtle, but I'll say it again. Project thinking is really oriented around cost and incurring a cost, creating something valuable, but it's largely focused on what's the minimum cost we have to expend to get that thing. Whereas product focus is on how do we steadily deliver value? How do we increase the value that we're getting from this? How do we tune that over time? It really is an ongoing strategic concern. So, for example, it's a shift from thinking of the CRM as something that you implemented, past tense, to thinking of the CRM as something that is a strategic enabler of significant portions of your business, a significant strategic enabler of your sales team, of your support team, of your pricing, quoting team, whatever. And it fits this idea that software can evolve steadily and continuously. If you pour concrete for the foundation of a building and you put it in the wrong place, it's very hard to correct that afterwards. It's very expensive. Once you've poured the concrete, you've laid the foundations, the pilings, the girders, and so forth, you're committed. Software you can change, you can re-platform, without the users even noticing. It's sometimes described as like rebuilding the jet airplane while in flight, but you can re-platform your software. You can make small and large changes. You can make some quite profound changes even while it's active, and it lends itself very much to these small tweaks because there's the cost of making changes is very, very low compared to traditional infrastructure. And you can even think of the software as having like its own profit and loss, like what is the benefit we're getting versus the cost we're incurring on this. And it does promote in-house ownership as opposed to something that's done by external consultants. And so I want to come do a little bit of a double click on this, the role of consulting companies. So if you think about, if you're a company, you need some capability like a CRM or whatever. You don't have the skills in-house to do it. You need to seek assistance. You find a vendor, you find Salesforce, say, as a vendor, and and then Salesforce is like, well, do you have a team of Salesforce experts who can build it? And you're like, we do not. And so so Salesforce is like, allow us to introduce you to Accenture or PwC or somebody. And so the consulting companies, often these are very big deals. These are tied to the initial implementation. They have high-level executive involvement. They're seen as one-time expenses, big strategic expenses that need to be planned for, budgeted for, but they're not necessarily being thought of as a one-time thing. Salesforce, for example, they're very interested in selling you the ongoing licenses on an ongoing basis, but the consulting prices, you're kind of wanting to keep that as low as possible, the upfront capital expenditure, as we say. And so because you want to get the project done as quickly as possible, finite type timeline, you don't want to go over budget, you don't want to go over time, even though they always do. You use project management techniques to control the costs. And you think of it as a one-time effort, although many people here have probably witnessed or been involved in having to redo some of these big implementations after they were already done, once. So it's and sometimes consulting companies stay on and so forth, but in general, consulting companies have the consultant arrangement has really predisposed the world of IT towards project thinking. Consulting companies, they come in, they do their thing, they roll off. That same team then goes to a different project. You're bringing the people to the work as opposed to bringing the work to the people. So I wanted to, from this book, Project to Product by Mick Kirsten, and I was just this morning looking at a YouTube video that he had given introducing the topic, and he's a very great speaker. I'd encourage you to check out some of his original material. But this is a table from his book, making a distinction between these two approaches. And he's got 7 criteria, and I'll move so you see there's 7 criteria total in terms of budget, the difference between project thinking and product thinking, in terms of timeframes, in terms of what is the measurement of success. And just to linger on this measurement of success, in particular focusing on the product side of success, success in a product is evaluated on an ongoing basis. We have operational expenses in the form of the staff, the team that maintains this in terms of the licenses and so forth. Are we operationally bringing the value, the revenue? Are we bringing the efficiencies to the organization or new revenue streams to the organization that are sufficient to cover those costs? So it's not a past tense thinking of, we did something in the past and now we're amortizing it down or something like that. It's current time thinking, value delivered. Now, the next 4 criteria are in terms of risk, the teams, the prioritization, the visibility. So just to explain these briefly, the risks of a project are largely incurred up front and a little bit hard to tune, although agile consulting companies attempt to tune the risk and tune what you're delivering over the course of the project. It's still very different from a mindset of product development where you're tuning continuously. You're always thinking like, what do users need? Are the needs evolving? You're trying to keep your finger on the pulse continuously of what's happening and what you can do to better address those. And that changes the dynamics of risk. You're not incurring the risk upfront so much. You're addressing the risk as you go and making a lot of smaller bets. Teams, I talked about this idea that projects bring people to the work. That was certainly my experience when I was a consultant. We'd get assigned to a project, a group of people I may never have met before. We work for a period of time. They're bringing the people to the work. Product team, a team that's embedded, like I know some of you embedded in banks and so forth, where you have a dedicated team, the work comes to you. The team always works together. They build a very rich working relationships. They understand everybody's strengths, weaknesses, the needs of the users and so forth. And so you're really investing deeply in the knowledge, in the domain-specific knowledge of those people. And that's another characteristic of a product company. For example, AutoRABIT, as an example of a product company, we have been thinking a lot for a long time about the needs of Salesforce development teams. And so the people here, we're not just building software and going from project to project. We're deeply embedded in this one set of concerns. And similarly, if you have a product team embedded in an organization, they become very attuned to who are the users, what's the usage, what are the concerns, what are the typical patterns that arise, and that that accumulation of knowledge can be very, very, very valuable to make sure you're staying on track. Here, just this illustration of what I was just describing, bringing people to the work as opposed to work coming to the people. Subtlety, but makes quite a difference. So here, again, the diagrams may take a minute for you to sort of understand what this is talking about here. But in the diagram up top, it's looking at 6 teams, and those teams are divided across functional specializations. So someone who's specialized for requirements gathering, like a business analyst, something like that, or development or testing or something like that. And that team is a stable team, but that they're taking on a variety of different projects, and the projects come and go and so forth. Now, the product mindset, and this is really the main thrust of why Mick Kirsten was so focused on this, the product mindset allows teams to organize as value streams. And the idea of a value stream is it is a sequence of work, a repetitive sequence of work processes that involve multiple people responding to requests and delivering value through a steady, stable process. So it's a system, but it's a linear system from value requested or something requested through value delivered. And when we talk about bringing work to the people, we talk about these stable value stream teams. And this topic has come up in different contexts, like in the book Team Topologies, they talk about stream aligned teams. The book Flow Engineering that I'll be releasing in a couple of months talks a lot about, it's totally focused on optimizing these value streams. And so the product mindset really does lend itself to this different organizational pattern, which is called value stream network. So speaking of flow engineering, shameless self-promotion here. This book will be out on May 14th, but the book Flow Engineering talks about how when you've got a stable product team delivering in a consistent way, you can map their work, begin to track metrics on that work, and focus on optimization. And although Mick Kirsten's book Project to Product on the surface focuses on that shift, his underlying focus is on increasing flow. And so he introduces in his book what's called the flow framework, tracking things like lead time from project started to project delivered, the flow load, how much work in progress you have at any given time, and so forth. And so this is what you'd call value stream management. And so when we talk about how can you get started, one aspect, so it's a mindset, and we've touched on lots of different aspects of the challenge so far in the webinar. And as you can see, it's tied into budgeting. And so there may be aspects of your working situation that are not as easy to move. But one thing you can do is start thinking now like a product team and think about what is our stable long-term responsibility? Who are the users that we're serving? What are their needs? What is the story of the value that we're delivering? The discipline of value stream mapping and management comes from Lean as it's the second of 5 Lean principles. The first of those Lean principles says precisely specify value by product. Precisely specify value by product, which means figure out exactly what it is that people use you for. Like for any product, you really need to understand why anybody would use you. Why would they use your Salesforce instance as opposed to spreadsheets? What's the distinctive? Spreadsheets are really flexible. They're better in a lot of ways than a database, right? They're super easy super changeable, malleable. Why would somebody choose to use a database as opposed to a spreadsheet? Well, keeping a large group of people in sync, for example, controlling, making sure that the data quality is good, data is clean. And so you think about what is the unique benefit that your team is bringing, who are your users, what do they need, and then you optimize for the flow of changes. And this brings us back to this topic of metrics. And I mentioned Mick Kirsten's flow framework and the book Flow Engineering. We summarize this long list of metrics, technical metrics and product metrics and business metrics that you can look at. But if I were to pick out 3 key metrics that matter for every team, when you want to think about optimizing the flow of value, I would say lead time. How much time elapses between the time a request is made and when we're able to deliver that? Lead time is something that you really need to know your own lead time. The throughput, how much work you can get done in a particular period of time, and that's closely tied to lead time. And then work in progress, how much work at any given moment you've got, you have in progress. Now, these three metrics are actually tightly tied together, and they're related to each other through something called Little's law, where basically you can calculate the lead time um, as a period of time. If you take the work in progress, I think it's the work in progress divided by the lead time, you'll get your throughput. And so they're closely tied together. So you want to reduce the work in progress to increase the throughput, for example. And decrease the lead time also will help increase the throughput. And so these three metrics are quite tied together. Throughput just means how many things you can get done in a certain period of time. So anyway, so that's some of my encouragement. Again, shifting, how can you get started in a project to product mindset? First of all, mindset, thinking like a product team. Second of all, starting to think about how to tune that flow of value and begin thinking in terms of flow as opposed to just getting something done, like yeah, optimizing for flow. So anyway, that's a lot. That's a lot of content. But I would love, I know that there's a couple of questions that have come through, and I'd love to hear any others. Chris asked, will the deck be provided? Will the deck be provided with the recording? That's a good question. I suspect that our organizers here, Lexi and Josh, could make it possible for us to distribute the deck as well. So um, okay, so that's that. So please put in the chat any other questions that you have that come up around this. One question that sometimes gets asked is, what types of new software will I need when adopting a product mindset? And I would say you don't necessarily need any new software. There's not necessarily um, any new software you need, except for if you're focusing on optimizing the flow of value, you may need to improve your tooling to gather metrics, like what is your lead time to optimize the flow of value. It can lend itself towards things like static analysis to check the code quality, making sure you've got automated deployments and these kinds of things. So Hong is asking this question, any scenarios of project and product combined? So are the two mutually exclusive? I would say they're not mutually exclusive. And often, for example, in Salesforce implementations, it's very common that a consulting company like Slalom or someone will come in and do an initial implementation. And then they will hand that off to a relatively smaller team. And you could think of that initial implementation team as being a project team, and the team they're handing off to, admins and devs, being like the product team. Now, where you get problems with this is you put most of the focus into the initial implementation as opposed to putting most of the focus into enabling that long-term product team, the people who will be left behind after the consulting company rolls off. So I would say you want to think about hiring early the team that would be maintaining this implementation long-term and having them very, very, very involved in the initial implementation. And one of the greatest powers you can have from a consulting company is if you have a chance to work side by side with those folks, understanding exactly what they're building, why, evaluating it, learning techniques from them, then you're really setting up that long-term product team for success. It's not uncommon to need a big boost, a big bump in the beginning to get started, but you want to be thinking long-term. So, okay, another question. So the question from Rachel is, I've been thinking about this for a while and very glad that we had this webinar. Started to think about what a final project will end up being in operational cost. And it's something to think about and relates to moving to the product mindset. So just to try to restate that, what I think the question is getting at is sometimes when we think about doing a project, we think about it as a one-time thing. We're not thinking about the real long-term operational costs. And there is let's say you have a consulting company that comes in and implements something, and nobody no full-time employee of the organization really understands what they built. It is extraordinarily hard to maintain that. And any change you want to make to that system will require a lot of time, a lot of thought. And then if you have another separate consulting company comes in, builds things in a totally different way, totally different, framework, style, naming conventions, no relationship to the previous thing, you've got another whole body of material you've got to maintain. And there's a significant maintenance cost to trying to make sense of that. And I believe that that's where most of the energy goes in Salesforce teams these days. It's just trying to figure out what the heck this is, because the orgs are so big, they're so vast. There's been so much upfront work done to build things out. There haven't been much thought about modularization, about keeping things fairly constrained. One of the benefits of modularization is that it means that the body of material you need to understand to maintain something is relatively small. When you have no modularization, which is the default in Salesforce, it's just so vast that you have to kind of understand the whole system to understand how to mitigate any risks of breaking changes, but nobody can understand the whole system. So I think that the long-term operational costs of projects often dwarf the upfront costs and should be considered more which encourages us to take a product mindset. So Anthony asking, typical software product teams rely on quantitative user research combined with qualitative product analytics. Have you seen successful versions of this in Salesforce land? I'd love to get any references to learn more in terms of roles, tools, processes you can use to do that as an inside product team. Awesome question. For example, AutoRABIT, as a software product company, we have some tools that we use like Pendo to check what buttons people are clicking and see if things are being used. It's not as common to see that. I honestly would have to check what the current state is. Once upon a time, we did used to use Google Analytics at my consulting company, Aperia. We used Google Analytics in the Salesforce instance to see which of the custom pages were used more frequently. I'm not sure what with the security controls, whether that's possible to use Google Analytics. But I do think that there are some basic metrics. I would say Elements Cloud does a good job of keeping track of, what objects are having data written to them. That's an important sign of whether something's being used or not. Is there change to the data? How often are records being updated? And a lot of that can be determined just through reports and through like SQL queries and so forth. So it wouldn't be too complicated to generate that. And to think in those terms is very different from a typical attitude that developers would have, where they just build something and then they move on. They build something, move on. They build something, move on. They're not looking at long-term usage and adoption. So knowing how many users are actually active in the Salesforce org, how many different users are changing records, would give you a sense for what is the uptake and the adoption in the organization. Companies really do need Salesforce teams to be looking through that lens to determine if they're being effective or not. So Chris asking, do you see team structure changing if you're going from project to product, leveraging service teams versus cross-functional teams? So do I see team structure changing as you're going from project to product? I do really in that spirit of bringing work to the people, and these team topologies talks about the idea of stream-aligned teams, and they're a group of people who are cross-functional. You've got some testers in there and developers, release managers, requirements people, whatever you call them, product managers or BAs. They've got a stable working relationship. And it's where you have this stability of the team that you can start looking at some of those effectiveness metrics that Anthony was asking about. Anthony was saying, like, well, can we track the adoption of the features we've built? Yeah, only if you have somebody whose job it is to track the adoption of the features you've built. And that's really where a product manager or could be a BA, somewhat similar uh, roles, but where someone whose stable concern it is to think about, are we meeting the needs of the service team? And when you have your product team, let's say you're looking after a support center, when you have the product team looking at the same business-facing metrics that the head of support is looking at, what is the call resolution time? What's the queue time? And so forth. And when your Salesforce product team is concerned about tuning those metrics down, then you're starting to really think like a product team. If you're saying, listen, our customer satisfaction is taking a big toll because the queue time is 20 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. What can we do to shorten the queue time? Can we offer a callback service, something like that? Then you're beginning to think about how technology can be employed to solve business problems. And then you're thinking like a product team. So you may have, and that knowledge needs to be spread to the engineers. Even if it's the product manager who's the primary holder of that, the engineering team needs to understand those same concerns so they understand really what is the creative problem that they're trying to solve. And often, you have this attitude among developers that their job is just to implement user stories or something like that. And that's really coming from a project mindset where it's somebody else's job to create the requirement and I just code the thing up. The most powerful and effective developers are those who really understand what business problem they're solving, and then they use their technical skills to execute towards fulfilling that. It's a very different mindset than just doing whatever the user story tells you to do. And that everybody really in their hearts wants that kind of creative ownership. There's a little bit more challenge to it. It's not necessarily immediately comfortable, but it's much more engaging for people than just doing what the ticket says or just going through the motions of your job. So the engagement involved of actually feeling like you and the team are working together to accomplish a goal, like you're actually helping the business. If you're working for a company like, a healthcare company, CVS or something like that, you feel like, what are we doing? We are helping to deliver healthcare to people, right? I mean, I happen to be a Lightning Web Component developer, but that's just incidental. What am I actually doing? I am helping deliver healthcare, and helping make sure that people get their claims resolved in a timely way, where you get everybody on the team thinking about the long-term business outcomes. That's one of the most powerful things. It's because the story of what you're doing is not changing all the time. If you're a project team with a consulting company, you don't really know anything much about the customers you're serving. You're like, who is this? What do they do again? You kind of come in, do your technical job, and then you roll off. So where you have stable long-term teams, they have a stable long-term story. And the story of what the team is doing the story of what the job is about, the story of why you come to work today is the most powerful, the most engaging thing. There's a story of President Kennedy visiting, it was like Goddard Space Center in 1965, something like that, and bumps into the janitor mopping the hallway. And he says to the janitor, "What's your job here?" And the janitor says to President Kennedy, he says, "Sir, I'm sending a man to the moon. Sir, I'm sending a man to the moon." So every job is tied to that mission. You can't accomplish the mission without everybody doing their job. And so getting that sense of purpose, that clear sense of purpose embedded in everybody, that's probably arguably the most powerful aspect of the product mindset, where you really feel like you're delivering value. Great. Just got one last question here before we wind up. Anna's asking, when Salesforce is the main source of truth within a company, it comes with a long list of dependencies for development or change. This makes the work of a product manager at times extremely difficult to support in the eyes of leadership. Any advice on how to deal with this? So when Salesforce is the main source of truth within a company, it comes with a long list of dependencies for development or change. This makes the work of a product manager at times extremely difficult to support in the eyes of leadership. Any advice on how to deal with that? And if you want to make any adjustments to your question, if I'm not hitting the answer, because I'm not sure I'm going to nail exactly what you're asking here. So feel free to retype in the chat. But so Salesforce has a long list of dependencies. There's lots of things that may need to get changed, may need to get adjusted. And so it may require different technical specialties to bring different technical specialists in. Um, uh, Yeah, I feel like I'm not going to be able to nail an answer to the question. I don't understand the question well enough. But the final point that she makes is that it makes the work of a product manager difficult to support in the eyes of leadership. So if we want to talk about justifying the idea of a product mindset in leadership, then we focus on value delivery. If we focus on we understand the story of the company, we are here to deliver on the mission of the company. That is our purpose. Then you can begin to talk the same language that leadership talks. So I think it's actually arguably easier as you get your team educated in what are you really trying, what value you're trying to bring to the business. It's easier to then have that conversation with leadership to justify adjustments to your approach. Okay, well, I'm super grateful to see everybody, well, not see anybody, to imagine you all here. Hopefully you've enjoyed seeing this presentation and hearing these ideas. Grateful to be with you, and please do send notes and questions on any other future webinar topics you'd love to hear more about. Take care, everybody.